From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Who won and who lost in Tuesday's primaries as Lindsey Graham introduces a nationwide federal 15-week ban on abortions? Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleague, the one and only Kim Strassel. Welcome, Kim. On Tuesday, Senator Lindsey Graham roiled the political scene in Washington and the November elections by introducing to Congress a federal bill to ban abortions nationwide at 15 weeks of pregnancy. And Kim, maybe the first place to start here is with the actual details of what Graham is proposing and how they would compare as a policy to what is available around the world.
Sure. So what he is essentially proposing is a federal ban on abortions past 15 weeks. There is an exception for when the mother's life is in physical danger. There's also an exception for rape victims. And also, it leaves in place state laws that are more restrictive. So it essentially, what it would do is it would limit some of the blue states that have few or no restrictions on abortions. Generally, I would argue that this is a very sensible and reasonable policy. It's on par with where most Western European countries are. Also, it would basically still allow for the vast majority of abortions that already take place in this country, in that 92.7% are usually done by 13 weeks or before. So this really would be a federal ban on kind of the more later term.
One of the things that was notable, though, after he introduced this was many Republicans in Washington seeming to try to distance themselves from this proposal. Mitch McConnell suggesting this would not be a bill that he would intend to bring up for a vote. And let's listen to a clip of Lindsey Graham explaining what he thinks he's doing here.
I think if you're running for the United States Senate and you're asked, if you went to Washington and there was a bill that would limit abortion after 15 weeks because the baby can feel pain at that point in time, and that is a little more liberal than what the Europeans do, that might be a good discussion for the voters to engage in. So what we're going to be doing during the process of running for federal office in the House and the Senate, I'm sure this will come up.
It seems to me, Kim, that he's trying to draw a line that he thinks Republicans can defend on the merits and help some of these Republican candidates who are in states where the state legislatures or some existing laws that predate the overturning of Roe v. Wade go further than 15 weeks or do not include these exceptions that Graham has in his bill. But one thing that I am wondering is whether all of those nuances will make their way to the voters in these 8 weeks that we have until November. And it seems to me that Democrats are doing their best to make sure that those nuances are lost. I'll read a few statements from political campaigns. Here's Mandela Barnes, the Democratic Senate candidate in Wisconsin. Senator Lindsey Graham reintroduced federal abortion ban legislation and made clear it will be a top priority to enact if Senator Ron Johnson is elected. Here's Michael Bennet in Colorado. The nationwide abortion ban introduced by Senate Republicans is completely outrageous. Val Demings in Florida. Marco Rubio just co-sponsored the bill to ban abortions and criminalize doctors. He'll stop at nothing to strip women of our constitutional rights. And one more here is Catherine Cortez Masto in Nevada. Far-right anti-choice Republicans are now pushing a national abortion ban. Let me be perfectly clear. I will fight to defend a woman's right to choose. My opponent won't. And Kim, one thing missing from all of those statements is 15 weeks, which it seems to me is a pretty important piece of what Senator Graham is actually proposing in this bill.
Right. And you also had Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who definitely does not do nuance, saying that this was a nationwide abortion ban. They're definitely going to present this as essentially Republicans introducing federal legislation to get rid of all abortions and trust that voters won't look at the details. They're also going to trust that voters aren't going to look at the actual details of their own proposal, which, by the way, is far more extreme than anything thing that Lindsey Graham is offering. Democrats' proposal would allow abortion up to 23 weeks, which is already getting into territory that most Americans, if you look at polling, are uncomfortable with. And they also have a clause in there saying that you could break that and go even further anytime a woman's health is at risk, although that leaves open the door that health is such a wide word that it could even be emotional distress. So this is really the more radical of the proposals, but they're going to try to cover all that. And here, I think here's the other problem too, Kyle, is I understand what Lindsey Graham is trying to do. He's trying to give Republicans, like you said, in those states where maybe their legislature is moving a different direction or there are laws on the book, to give them a landing spot, a federal landing spot. There's a couple of problems with that, though. One, it trounces all over Republicans' long-term message that this really should be left up to the states to manage it. And two, it puts a lot of Republicans in awkward places because of the dynamics of their own states. So, for instance, Tiffany Smiley, who is the Republican nominee in Washington state, who is challenging Patty Murray. This is definitely more a blue state. She said that she wasn't going to support this. She had to come out and say no, because that is maybe a policy that is way too restrictive for the voters of Washington state. Similarly, Joe O'Dea, who was the nominee in Colorado for the Republican Party for the Senate, also distanced himself from it. Even some red state candidates may also walk away from this because they're concerned that maybe this is too liberal for some of the voters in their states. So I understand what he was trying to do, but I think it's a very dicey political prospect.
And I think I find myself equally perplexed by the political read that he has here. Kim, you mentioned the Democratic bill in Congress. This is a bill that almost all of the Democrats have voted for. And as you say, it would protect abortion on demand through fetal viability, which is about 23 weeks. One thing I would also point out is that it seems to protect sex-selective abortions. So if there are states that want to ban that and say you're not allowed to terminate a girl just because you wanted a boy, this Democratic bill would seem to override that. And there are a lot of issues where I think the political polling is on the Republican side here. And that would be one, but simply the 24 weeks line would be another. If you look at the Gallup data, that's the one that I keep going back to. 67% of Americans say they want abortion to be generally legal in the first 3 months of pregnancy. That's 12 weeks. And if you ask, do you agree with that statement through the second 3 months of pregnancy, so 24 weeks overall, only 36% of Americans say yes. And so I grant that Lindsey Graham's 15-week line is in between those, 12 and 24. But it seems to me, I agree with you, Kim, that the majority is made by purple states. And to pick up on the other point you made, it seems like Republicans, conservatives have been arguing for 50 years since Roe v. Wade that abortion is an issue for states, for state police powers to regulate. And apparently one of those arguments has come from Lindsey Graham. And let's listen to the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre on Tuesday.
I'm going to quote Lindsey Graham from August 7th, 2022. And he said, "I've been consistent. I think states should decide the issue of marriage and states should decide the issue of abortion." And so there, that's from his own mouth. And now he wants to do a national ban.
The other advantage, Kim, of taking that argument and continuing it, set aside for a minute whether that's actually true given our readings of the Constitution or not, but the other advantage of it is if you believe that this kind of legislation from Congress is unconstitutional, then that applies to the bill that Democrats are trying to pass to do their own national abortion policy. I mean, if Republicans sign on to this Graham approach, it seems like they're giving up a really good argument about what Democrats want to do.
Right. There's a lot of problems with this. One, as we just went through, simply by introducing it, he's essentially forcing in some ways every Republican candidate out there to take a position on it. And whereas before they were trying to get themselves straight in terms of their state politics, there's also the potential problem that whether or not they support it or not, they're going to get tarred with it. Their opponents are going to say, look, this candidate is from a party that is essentially proposing a nationwide abortion ban, even though, as we discussed, that isn't technically correct in any way. On the Constitution constitutional point, yes, Republicans have been making a very strong argument that this should be left to the states and that there isn't really the running room in the Constitution to have a nationwide protection for abortion, which is what Democrats have been supporting. But then you look at the Republican side, you have Lindsey Graham suggesting that his bill would stand for the Constitution under the Commerce Clause or the Equal Protection Clause. But then you end up in this very weird situation where essentially are Republicans really going to start stretching the definition of the Commerce Clause, something that they've been very critical of the other party for doing in the past, to somehow claim that abortion is commerce? It puts them sideways on all kinds of constitutional and legal and federalist principles that have always been hallmarks of the Republican Party.
I would agree with that, particularly on the Commerce Clause, Kim. And one additional point I would make is defenders of this kind of legislation sometimes point to the partial birth abortion ban, which was upheld by the Supreme Court. But I would point to the concurrence from Justice Thomas. This is a 2007 case. And he says, I also note that whether the act constitutes a permissible exercise of Congress's power under the Commerce Clause is not before the court. That's a point that I think is often missed, is there was this legislation that was upheld by the Supreme Court, but not under the Commerce Clause. That point was not raised. And I think it definitely would be if Graham's proposal or something like it were to make it into law.